What's up, Diggity Dogs? So the Jaguars are 9 days away from the 2023 NFL Draft. Always an exciting time. If you're a fan of really any NFL team, even if you're the Los Angeles Rams, and you never get to have first-round picks, it's still really fun to see really where these different guys go in the draft, what teams do what. Especially this year, I'm actually really interested in seeing where the quarterbacks end up. Quite frankly, I had a commenter leave a comment on my last video, and I kind of agree with him where I'm almost more interested to see where the quarterbacks go as opposed to really who the Jaguars are drafting. And I think a lot of that intrigue has to do with the fact that, the AFC South will be adding quarterbacks. Right now, it's Trevor Lawrence and everybody else. I mean, right now, there's really not much competition for the top quarterback spot in the AFC South. Ryan Tannehill is probably a very, very distant second. And then it's just really a bunch of dudes out there. But there's going to be some quarterback acquisitions, whether it be the Texans at number 2 overall, the Colts at number 4 overall, or even maybe the Titans get in the mix, trade up and try to get a guy. So, all that's going on. But the Jaguars are drafted number 24. It's a weird feeling because last couple of years, the Jaguars drafted number 1 overall. Like in the last 4 or 5 years, we've been drafting in the top 5, top 10. I think it was like 14 out of the last 15 drafts. The Jaguars have been picking in the top 10. So, picking in the top 24, number 24 overall, it'll be different, but it's exciting because, I hope every year we're drafting in the late 20s and the 30s. Hopefully at some point we get that treasured number 32 overall pick because that means that we're going to host the Lombardi Trophy then. Man, that's really the dream, right? That's a dream. We keep watching the Jaguars for the ultimate goal of potentially getting that Lombardi Trophy, having the parade in Jacksonville on Bay Street, and just all the craziness that would come with it. I really can't even imagine. So yeah, in this video, we're going to talk about who the Jaguars are going to pick at number 24. Now, I kind of made this analogy in my last video. When you're picking in a top 5, it's kind of like this many players you can get. Because it's a lot easier to project. But as you get further away, the funnel starts to get bigger, and there really is a much larger array of players that people can pick. That's really where, in the top 10, I think most GMs have a pretty consensus top 10 players, and it's pretty much chalk about the guys that get drafted in the top 10. Maybe the order is flipped a little bit, but really once you get outside of that range, I mean, there are prospects that guys might rank the number 14 overall prospect, but they don't even go in the first round. It's just a lot more of a judgment call within that area. And, with the Jaguars, there's really a lot of range of options. And, it's also hard to pinpoint just because the Jaguars have a lot of needs right now. I mean, they need offensive line, they need tight end, they need defensive line, they need, another secondary player. And on top of that just being able to draft like the best player available. So what we're going to do here, I'm not an expert when it comes to draft prospects. I make that very well known. I tell you guys all the time, look, I'm not a football expert. I'm just a Jaguars fan. I'm also by no means a draft prospect guy. I'm not going to pretend like I know these guys or like I've done any work on these guys, but a lot of guys have. So I'm going to rely on their work. And I'm going to go through a bunch of mock drafts, and we're going to see really the trend about who the Jaguars will be taking at number 24 overall. So let's get into it. The first one I have is a mock draft from USA Today. They have the Jaguars at pick number 24 going Brian Branch, safety out of Alabama. They say this is a pairing that materialized in the last mock draft. So let's run it back. The versatile Branch's penchant for finding the ball no matter where he initially lines up would come in handy for a burgeoning Jaguars defense that could take off in 2023. So yeah, this is, as you're going to see, there's a trend. This Brian Branch guy is really like he's in a lot of mock drafts. I feel like half the mock drafts I look at, it's Brian Branch getting selected to the Jaguars. And with the Jaguars, they like to run a bunch of different looks with their defense. They like to confuse teams, and they need another secondary player. So he's a guy that they say could also fill in at the nickel cornerback spot and potentially be a week 1 starter. So that's who this guy has the Jags taking. Now the next mock draft from PFF has the Jaguars once again taking Safety Brian Branch. They say Branch doesn't really have an assigned position. He fits in as a box safety or a slot cornerback at the next level, which is where he could be projected to play for the Jaguars. Currently, Trey Herndon is projected to start for the Jaguars in that role, but Branch would likely take over from day one. The Alabama prospect also brings the flexibility to move back to safety if necessary throughout the season or later in his career. Yeah, so, I guess with this, because they say, okay, this Brian Branch guy, he's very versatile, which is cool. But at the same time, I do get a little bit hesitant about these prospects that come out and they don't have like a true position, because a lot of times it's like, oh my God, this guy is so versatile. He can play this, he can play that, he can play this. What I'm worried about, I would much rather a player be really, really good at one position than just good at two positions. Let me take that back. I would rather a player be great at one position than good at two positions. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes I worry about a guy that doesn't have a true identity and doesn't have a true, really, really strong strength. And, with Brian Branch, I would prefer him find a position and lock it down, whether that's the nickel cornerback next year, and then as you get older, as you grow in a defense, and as you not become a rookie, then you can kind of expand out in more roles. But yeah, I think it's a lot because the Jaguars defense, it has known to be a little bit confusing. I know Devin Lloyd, it took him a little bit to pick it up, and he still hasn't really picked it up yet. So I'd rather a guy come in here, say, okay, you're the nickel cornerback, that's your position, as opposed to, switching out and playing like a bunch of different positions. But that's just me. I don't know what you guys think. So this next one I'm going to pull up, this one is from actually John Shipley. He did a nice 7th round mock draft, so I'll go through some of his picks. He covers the Jags for Jaguar Report, which is actually SI. He does a really good job. I appreciate his work. So he has the Jaguars at pick number 24 overall, going Anton Harrison. I'll save reading on this just so you guys can he deserves a click, so you guys go over there. And I think this is a good mock draft with his picks. When you're looking at the Jaguars' needs and really going over here and pretty much fulfilling most of these needs. I mean, look, offensive tackle Anton Harris, the Jaguars lost Jawan Taylor, so that makes sense. Number 56, cornerback Cam Smith out of South Carolina. Jaguars need a cornerback, so that makes sense. 88 overall, 3rd round pick, edge Brian Young from Tennessee. Again, we need defensive line help. We need defensive end and defensive tackle. The next one, 4th round pick, tight end Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion. I hope I don't get demonetized for saying that last name, but yeah, that's another, tight end is another need. And then 127 overall, defensive lineman Colby Wooden. Now, it doesn't always work out like this where you're every pick you're just filling a need. But in this one, it just happened to work out that way. Over in the 6th round, another defensive lineman. So yeah, ooh, look at this one. Oh, I thought it said Tulane. I remember UCF got killed by a running back from Tulane. I forget his name, but yeah, that's what he has going on here. I like it. Obviously, filling need is good. It never seems to work out that way, though. It never seems that you fill out all your different holes. And the Jaguars, if history repeats itself, the Jaguars will not be able to hit on a tight end, because it feels like the tight end just never hits for us in the draft when it comes to really placing, finding a landing spot for that. Okay, so next up, I'm going to go to CBS Sports, which I like CBS Sports. This is a good mock draft center, because they have like 6 different mock drafts on here. So we're going to go through these ones. At pick number 24, Miles Murphy Jr. He's an edge rusher out of Clemson. They said that Murphy turned 21 in early January. While we like to see him play with more consistency, his best football is in front of him for sure. He has all the physical tools you look for in an elite edge defender, and it's easy to see him in a few years being dominant. And that, in large part, is what makes him an interesting prospect. Yeah, so this looks like, I don't know a lot about him, but it looks like a player that, you're once again drafting based on potential, and probably a guy that you're not going to be getting a lot of in year one. A guy that's going to have to continue to develop. He's 21, is, very young, for a draft pick. Usually these guys are getting drafted at 22, 23, but hey, he's got sounds like a Trent Baalke guy, man. He's got the traits and all that. I don't know if they would rather get a true plug and play guy right here, but when you look down the road, I'm wearing Josh Allen. Love the guy. Hope we can keep him, but at this point, he's not locked down for the future. So we have some questions at defensive line. So Miles Murphy is that dude. This other guy who's mocked. So Ryan Wilson had that. Chris Trapasso once again has Brian Branch getting selected to the Jaguars. Branch Branch is not a supremely gifted athlete. He's incredibly smart with his positioning on the field and has plus coverage instincts and is the best tackling defensive back I've ever scouted. So I'm not going to go too much into Brian Branch. I think a lot of us know about him, and we've talked about him plenty in this video. So next up, we have Josh Edwards. He has the Jaguars at pick number 24, taking Brian Breesy. Now, this one is a popular one. I've seen Brian Breesy's name pop up a ton. Another guy from Clemson. So will the Clemson pipeline stay here? The Jaguars had 3 offensive starters last year from Clemson when it comes to having Trevor Lawrence, Etienne, and Tyler Shatley. So maybe the Clemson pipeline stays true. He said Jacksonville continues building up the front, which edge rushers Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen. The Jaguars now add an interior defender with the athletic profile to rush the passer. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to complain about going defensive lineman, and Brian Breesy sounds like, I hope I'm saying that right. Brian Breesy sounds like a solid dude. This next guy is Kyle Stackpole. He has Miles Murphy getting selected. Jaguars stop Miles Murphy's fall by adding an edge rusher with the size and traits to beat offensive tackles. So yeah, that's I would definitely be for that, because look, at this point, I say this a lot with the Jaguars, and I really think on defense, like, we need a real X factor on our defense. And look, we have good players on the defense. I'm not saying that we don't, but you know what the Jaguars don't have? We don't have like a Micah Parsons. We don't have a Aaron Donald. We don't have a Nick Bosa. You have different players at different positions that are just completely dominant, and there's players like that all over the field. I mean, Bobby Wagner was at one point. Even Cam Chancellor at one point for the Seahawks. It doesn't have to be a defensive lineman; it has to be someone around. But a lot of defenses have, like, a lot of the great defenses, they have that dude that's like, okay, we got to plan on stopping this guy, and that helps guys around them play better. And it looks like Miles Murphy's the guy that, look, he's probably boomer bust. If you get his best, sounds like he's a guy that could be really good. But if you don't get his best, then hopefully you don't end up with like a Caleb on Chase on, because look, we've drafted plenty of defensive linemen and we've gotten their worst. Okay, so I don't have to tell you what that looks like, but hopefully we can get the best in somebody. So next up is Will Brinson. Will Brinson, notable CBS guy. He has the Jaguars drafting Kelly Ringo. Kelly Ringo. I don't know how to pronounce the first name, but he says the Jaguar and Kelly Ringo, he's a cornerback out of Georgia. Says the Jaguars roster looks pretty darn stout, but Jacksonville's defense needs some help on the back end of the defense. Trent Baalke hasn't been shy about targeting Georgia for help on his roster, spending a first and a second round pick on dogs in the last 2 years. Plus, think of the cheap moving costs. Okay. So yeah, it goes into more about him, strengths, weaknesses. So yeah, he's a guy that when I see people discuss Kelly Ringo, he's kind of there's a lot of debate about him, and I don't know if he's a super popular player amongst Jaguar fans. But hey, he's a cornerback. The Jaguars need cornerbacks. The last cornerback we drafted out of Georgia turned out to be pretty well. And look, Georgia's been able to churn out a pretty good defense. So, it's one of those guys I'm never going to complain about drafting a guy from Alabama. And I definitely won't complain now about drafting a guy from Georgia, especially on that defense. So next up, we have Pete Prisco, our boy. Love Pete Prisco. Definitely my favorite national guy. Love him and Tony's show on Mondays during the season. He has Gator, Florida Gator coming over here. Osiris Torrance, he's an offensive guard. They say they can take Torrance and play him at left guard to give him one of the biggest lines in the NFL. Torrance might be the best offensive lineman in this class. He could also play right tackle if they let Cam Robinson go in 2024 and move Walker Little to the left side. So that's interesting. I like when they talk about current roster, like what they would kind of do with the if they were on the Jags and how they would fit in. But he brings an interesting point with maybe shuffling around the offensive line. But hey, I've said it before. I really do think that the Jaguars, even though Brian Branch is getting mocked to the Jaguars and half of these mock drafts, I really do think they come away with a big guy, whether it be defensive line or offensive line. I think that's the pick because I'm a strong believer that, if your offensive line dominates their defensive line, and if your defensive line dominates their offensive line, the game's going to work out. We're going to kill them. I mean, that's just my belief. So I am 100% all about building up the trenches and making that as best as we can. I want to get pressure on the quarterback. I want the Jaguars great and Trevor Lawrence to be well protected. So I'm never going to complain about the Jaguars potentially taking an offensive lineman. So Osiris Torrance in that mock draft. Next up, we have Peter Schrager of NFL Network. He has Brian Branch to the Jaguars. He says, I think it's offensive lineman or defensive back here for the Jaguars. Interesting. Says Branch was the slot corner for Alabama, but he could play all over Jacksonville's secondary. So yeah, that would be I would love if Brian Branch is available at 24. I really do wonder if they take him because a lot of times where there's smoke, there is fire. And I don't think I saw a lot of Brian Branch before the combine, but now after the combine, when the GMs and everybody's talking, all of a sudden, boom, Brian Branch, Brian Branch, Brian Branch. So there must be maybe some smoke to the fire. And look, Balky likes his traits. Balky wants to get players that are versatile. So we'll see. Maybe that's the pick. So next up, we have Pro Football Network. They have the Jaguars taking another Georgia player. They have Nolan Smith, edge out of Georgia. They say there are speedy defenders, there are athletic defenders, and there is Nolan Smith, who's simply the best in both respects. Smith can free up Trayvon Walker to rush the passer from one side while he occupies the offense coordinator's minds on the other, pairing together with his former teammate to make an incredibly gifted edge rushing duo. So, yeah, that excites me. I mean, one thing that drove me nuts about last year is I feel like there were games where the Jaguars defensive line just disappeared when it comes to just getting pressure on the quarterback. So, I would like nothing more than, like I said, getting anyone, whatever the Trent Baalke crew scout as the best guy when it comes to defensive line. I would have no problem with taking that. Now, one thing that's interesting about all these mock drafts is when I did this video, I think it was before the combine, there were a lot of tight ends being taken. I think I had Dalton Kincaid getting taken, Michael Mayer getting taken, and even I think Darnell Washington getting taken by the Jags at pick number 24. But in this one, no tight ends. So I don't know if there's word getting out. I don't see the Jaguars taking tight end at number 24. But it's interesting that there's none here. I do hope that the Jaguars can somehow find a tight end at some point that really fits what the Jaguars want to do, because right now the Jags have 3 tight ends on the roster. So, and tight end is a big part of what Doug Peterson wants to do with the offense, playing a lot of 2 tight end sets. So we'll see with that. But overall, man, draft is a little over a week away. I will be live streaming during a draft, so I hope you guys can, come over there and join me. So with all that said, appreciate you guys watching this video, really do. And with all that said, let me know what you guys think the Jaguars do at pick number 24. Go Jags.